Guys, it's me, Jeremy. You guys should know me by now. I love looking at the development of champions and the insights that take place within the cycle that brings a champion to life. That's kind of like my new thing, and I'm really enjoying it. So similar to how we looked at Katarine a couple of weeks ago, today we're taking a look at another potential champion concept. And today, it's a champion that goes by the name of KOMACHI. She's a seriously awesome character, one that I think is probably more awesome than Katarine, and I'd love to see her released one day. Let's get started. KOMACHI is a character that was developed by Riot a while back. She's been out of development for quite some time now, but Riot, who I believe was the main designer, or at least one of the designers who worked on KOMACHI, described her as being a pure tank, scythe-wielding champion. Imagine someone who was kind of like the female version of the Grim Reaper, but without the Grim Reaper backstory. Like, that's how she looks, but her backstory is a different idea. And she functioned as a pure tank, so probably a top laner or maybe a jungler depending on your utility. Now, this concept is one that I see as being pretty badass, and the biggest thing to think about with a champion concept when it comes to League of Legends definitely has to be whether or not they are unique. Is there room for a character like this in League of Legends? Well, the ideas have been toyed around with a bit. We have Kindred, who is essentially the League of Legends version of the Grim Reaper, but KOMACHI, I mean, it's hard to describe, because there isn't actually any official concept art released for her, but she takes on more of like a playful version that is sort of based off of the Grim Reaper. Her lore had pretty much nothing to do with it, and she didn't look anything like Karthus, who you'd probably see as being maybe the Grim Reaper in terms of the character model. And the idea of the character who uses a scythe as a weapon for melee attacks and not just a tool to cast spells with like fiddlesticks or something, is one that's definitely unique and is a pretty cool thing. I mean, a scythe is just a badass weapon, and it's more interesting than, you know, another sword or a gun or a bow. And I would love to see more characters with interesting weapons be added into the game. As for the development of KOMACHI, she did actually have a decent amount of work put into her. She started her development cycle with what was probably her gameplay kit, and the design that she would take in-game. Her design revolved around the concept of being like this zone control tank, so something similar to like maybe a control mage, but instead being placed on a full tank character that controlled zones not through high area of effect damage, but through displacement abilities and crowd control effects. Some of her ideas involve things like a slow zone, or maybe like a haste zone that you would place on the ground, or even a zone that would push out enemies and crowd control them with what was essentially a knockback, or on the flip side, a pull zone that would make enemies gravitate towards KOMACHI instead. Her design was essentially a more slower, less damage focused take on the zone control playstyle that we see in a lot of mages like Victor, Anivia, etc., which is one that's pretty cool and it has a lot of potential. One of the more interesting abilities she had involved something that Riot described as something that was kind of similar to Veigar's E, except that it was an 8-sided event horizon cage. This ability was a lot different to Veigar's though, because if you touched one side of the cage, instead of being stunned, you would actually just get teleported to the other side of the cage. So if you touched the bottom of it, you got teleported to the top. And this ability interacted with both enemies and allies probably, so it served as a way to have kind of like a mobility spell maybe. You could place it in front of you and then teleport instantly to the other side to cover some distance, or you could also use it as like an escape tool for your allies, and it kind of worked as also like a zone capture for the opponents because due to the way that it worked, unless you flashed out of it or had like a blink ability, a dash wasn't going to cut it. It meant that you were just stuck inside the cage for the entire duration of the ability. And although you were able to jump around and dodge skill shots using the mechanics of the cage, you were stuck in it until it ran out pretty much. Now, this ability seemed really cool and super versatile too, but it encountered a lot of problems that meant that it ultimately was terrible gameplay. Getting stuck yourself or getting an ally stuck inside the cage was really annoying, and even for opponents it was really unfair, and the idea of using it for mobility when you were outside of the cage was one that didn't really make all that much sense in actual gameplay testing, especially with her theme, no matter how cool it might have been to use. It was a pretty cute ability as described it, but it was terrible gameplay design for a space manipulator. Another ability she had involved a design similar to Darius's Apprehend, but more of like a swap ability. Imagine like a super short range Urgot ultimate, but on a basic ability that was also a skill shot. Now, this ability was a little bit more successful, and although it might seem a bit crazy on paper, it wasn't all that much better than Darius's actual Apprehend ability, considering you have the super short range and the skill shot aspect that the ability likely had. It's a neat idea, and if KOMACHI was to be released, this ability would probably still be in her kit. It was one of the core abilities they used to give KOMACHI the theme that they wanted of being able to transpose both herself and her enemies. They liked that theme a lot, felt like it fit with the control tank playstyle, and wanted to capture it in her kit. Another gameplay theme they also wanted to capture was to be able to give her allies advantageous terrain. So think of something like maybe a J-skate, but over a much bigger and more of like a circular zone, that maybe gave like combat buffs and stuff instead of movement speed. This concept's really cool to me too because I imagine it as some sort of like a reverse control mage playstyle, where instead of controlling the zones and positioning of your opponents, you control the zones and positioning of your allies by giving them zones that buff them with combat stats that they are rewarded for staying in, with the trade-off being that they kind of limit their positioning to inside the zone, since you wouldn't want to go walking outside of the zone during a team fight. Unfortunately, they were unable to get a gameplay design kit that was good enough to go through with, and the design for KOMACHI kind of fell apart during the development of her conceptual art. Since yeah, it's kind of true that the design of a scythe-wielding Grim Reaper-esque girl has a little bit of a few hoops to go through to set herself apart from Karthus and a few other characters in the game, and it's a design that's tough to fit within the League of Legends art style too, that is typically a little bit more upbeat and, you know, epic, heroic, or villainous, rather than just this like super serious and intense and dark. KOMACHI has been officially cancelled, but the concepts involving her design were seriously awesome. I especially really think that the gameplay kit is super awesome, and the female pure tank character, based off of the Grim Reaper, is one that's pretty sweet too. It's a character that I see as having a lot of potential, and although she has been officially cancelled, there's loads and loads of characters that come back from the dead, so to speak, after being cancelled and eventually get made into champions. I personally think KOMACHI is worth a revisit in some way, shape, or form from the champion design team, but what do you think? Should Riot release KOMACHI? I guess the main concern is whether or not it's possible to make her into a character that fits the ideas that a League of Legends champion needs to accomplish, but I see it as being possible for sure. But I'm more interested in what you guys think. So leave a comment, and if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you didn't hit that dislike, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.